Office of the Legislative Auditor released a special review of the Minnesota Department of Human Services this week, looking into allegations of kickbacks in state-backed programs.
Those programs provide necessary services for autism patients under the age of 21. Evan Berg spoke with Republican Senator Rich Draheim about what they found.
We had 14 different programs get frozen. And there are real people that need these services that are affected by all this fraud.
Between July 2017 and February 2024, the Department of Human Services Inspector General closed 25 complaints without further investigation. Minnesota's nonpartisan Office of the Legislative Auditor found that of those complaints, 3 involved alleged kickbacks in programs meant to help autistic youth.
Interpreted this 1995 rule, and most experts have said there were 2 paths they could have gone to address the kickback.
Instead, Senator Rich Draheim says that the department failed to pursue these claims further or freeze funds during the investigation due to a misunderstanding of federal statute about whether kickbacks could be counted as fraud in this situation and if it would fall under its jurisdiction. Fraud being a big topic in the state, he says the findings are worrying.
It just needs to be addressed, and to me, we need to inspect every provider across the state on a random basis.
As the number of early intensive developmental and behavioral intervention program providers using state medical assistance has grown by 400% over the past 4 years, Draheim says the need for more scrutiny is essential.
And I think that's something that people that are doing this don't understand, or they don't care because they're too greedy. But we need to protect the people that truly need these services.
In Mankato, Evan Berg, KEYC News Now.
Senator Draheim is one of dozens of senators from across the aisle that are currently pushing for independent Office of Inspector General to better investigate accusations of fraud in the state when they occur. While that bill has passed the Senate, it's still under consideration in the House.